This is my final tape regarding the Enclave. It includes many different things about them that have never even seen the light of day. It includes a glimmer of hope for the faction. It includes my story. As you may know by now, I am deeply rooted to the Enclave in my past, as I have hinted at many times during my previous holotapes. Sometimes even accidentally bleeding over into incorrect tapes due to some processing errors. You know, pre-war technology and all that. It is about time that I come clean on who I am, and how I know so much about the Enclave, and how I got away. The Wanderer was a name dawned by an ex-Enclave operative running from the mistakes of his past, attempting to amend his wrongdoings to the people of the wasteland, with guilt looming over his head. This was no hero's alias, or a mask for a villain to hide behind. His name was a scar, a burden which had been seared into the flesh of his mind, which he carried with his heavy soul, even until his dying breath. Without further ado, this is my story. This is the story of the Wanderer. Our story begins in February of 2240. The Enclave Californian sector stay hidden away off land on their oil rig. Within this facility, a baby is conceived. The mother was an Enclave servicewoman, serving the Enclave's military as a foot soldier, and the father was an engineer who specialized in fixing busted power armor suits from soldiers who sustained damage in the field. This child was to be raised in the mother's care for the foreseeable future, until the eventual day would arrive where Frank Horrigan would detonate the oil rig's self-destruct. When the child was 2 years old, still oblivious to what was happening around him at the time, he was evacuated from the oil rig alongside his parents and taken to Navarro, the mainland base of operations in California and recruitment center for the Enclave. Upon arrival, a lot of the high-ranking officials noted that the population was overwhelming, and there would not be enough room for all of the Enclave personnel. The decision was made to refurbish an old Air Force base hidden away in the mountains to house the new division of Enclave personnel headed that way. Not many wastelanders went travelling up the mountains after the mutant scare and stories of the previous century, accompanied by the dangerous terrain and unpredictable weather, the perfect hideaway. By 2250, the base was fully operational and was named Camp Eridanus. The child had grown under the care of the now retired mother and his engineer father, teaching him valuable lessons like how to fix faulty laser weaponry, overcharging microfusion cells, and the basics of an Enclave advanced power suit. At the age of 18, the child was inducted into the Enclave's military finally, donning his mother's old suit of power armor which was refurbished and heavily modified. He became an asset that the Enclave kept a keen eye on during training, blood boiling after he was informed of the oil rig incident at the young age. The soldier was adamant to make the wasteland pay for disrupting his home, his family, his peace. At this point, Camp Eridanus communications personnel had lost contact with Navarro years ago, assuming that it was going dark after an NCR threat in the area, unaware of the events that truly transpired. The private's first mission was one that affected his view on life drastically, challenging his loyalty to the Enclave, his ethics, and his morality in his service. A torch and burn operation on a new California Republic camp of sorts. The objective was to burn the area down with the inhabitants within, but one thing that the captain of the squad failed to mention was that this was no ordinary mission, nor was it an NCR military camp. The location they had been dispersed to was an NCR refugee camp, holding civilians as well as NCR soldiers and the officer who was of high priority, who was the target of the mission. Upon seeing civilians fleeing the flames that the hellfire carelessly and mercilessly spewed, the private halted and dropped his weapon, as the lieutenant shoved it back into his arms angrily and ordered him to open fire. From this day forward, the private questioned what he was fighting for. Was the Enclave's true mission to reclaim the wasteland and protect those within it? It did not appear so to him. If his higher-ups were fine with burning an entire refugee camp to the ground for a handful of measly NCR targets, what the hell was he fighting for? These questions would linger in the back of the private's mind for years to come. Years passed since the private's first mission, climbing from the ranks of private to captain and leading his squad, the same one that exacted the raising of the refugee camp all those years ago. His hatred for his own family, brothers and sisters grew stronger each day, and it was during this time that the group made a name for themselves: the Wanderer Squad. The squad was a small team of Enclave operatives who were loyal to the very bone to the Enclave and the Enclave only. Ironic regarding the man who was their commanding officer. The Wanderer Squad specialized in stealthily scouting areas and marking them with a pink, turquoise and hot pink Enclave Advanced Power Helmet, belonging to the protagonist of a comic book series exclusively sold on the oil rig back in the day, a symbol which the captain grew to adore and adopt in his future. One desolate December morning, the colonel sent the specialist team on an ambush operation sometime during 2269. Brotherhood of Steel operatives were located taking a detoured path away from their full force towards Nevada. One of the members was identified as an elder, and all members were shoot on sight. The Wanderer Squad was dispatched to execute them. Upon arrival at an excellent vantage point, the captain noticed that through his scope, there were children walking alongside the paladins and knights, what the Brotherhood of Steel dubbed squires. The colonel specified he wanted them all dead, and the captain was the man who had to execute that order. But he could not make himself do it. This was the last straw. The last time the Enclave lied to him or his team about the details of his missions. The captain ordered his troops to abort and report back to base, where the colonel demoted him and was on the verge of having him court-martialed on the spot. The actions of the captain led to the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel reaching their destination in Nevada, meaning he was somewhat of a catalyst to many events in the wasteland over there. Over his time in service, the captain grew fond of the corporal of his squad. The pair shared similar ideals and over the years became pretty good friends, and in conversation felt that his actions were correct during the operation. During the night, the punished captain was awoken by the sound of his tent flap flowing in the wind. It was time. Suddenly, there was a loud blast and a flash of red. The corporal had come to save him from his execution, by no other than some of his own men. After equipping their gear, the two began to flee the camp, chased by their former allies, desperately looking for their ticket out of the Enclave. Upon reaching the vertibird refueling station, the corporal began piloting and boarding the bird, while the disgraced soldier fired upon his teammates as they prepared to get airborne. The captain and his companion had abandoned the Enclave, betrayed through their choice of morality over their loyalty, cited as traitors. Fortunately, the two managed to get away before anti-air weaponry or orbital bombardment was prepared, and the escapees headed towards Nevada and planned to keep going that way until they found a safe place to land. Upon entry into the Nevada area, the corporal noted that the vehicle was low on fuel and they needed to refuel immediately unless they wanted to go plummeting to their deaths. The two decided that Nellis Air Force Base may be a recommended touchdown point, however took into consideration it may be in the hands of the Enclave. Unfortunately, they were correct in saying the base was indeed occupied and prepared to fire upon them. The descendants from the nearby Vault 34 were known to be the most ruthless and defensive batch of vault dwellers in the entirety of the Mojave, firing a handful of anti-air cannon rounds at the vertibird. As one of the artillery shells struck, the vehicle began to twist and turn in the air before the corporal managed to regain control of the bird and drive it to a safe touchdown point. After making some decent distance between the base, the vertibird went crashing down into a deep, dark valley. When the corporal and the captain regained consciousness, the captain dragged the pilot from her seat, noticing her power armor had been pierced during the crash. The captain rushed to find shelter to attempt to save her, although the odds were against them due to the amount of blood pouring from the corporal's wounds. Suddenly, a loud sniper rifle blast shook the canyon, piercing the corporal's helmet. she was killed upon impact. The captain screamed in shock, as one of the only members of his team which he did not look on with disdain had been murdered right in front of him. What could it have been that killed her? An Enclave sniper? A raider? The captain failed to think as his mind raced. The captain turned and began to fire his laser rifle aimlessly, fearfully, in case he was next. As he fired with one arm, he began to drag what remained of the corporal's body into a nearby cave with the other, out of view of the sniper. The captain rested in the cave through the night, developing thoughts of fear, guilt, anger, sadness, and hatred. His detest for the faction that he was born into grew to an all-time high. He wished to see even the closest of friends from back in his days as a child burn, just like those innocents at the NCR camp. It was from this day forward, through his guilt, he began to call himself a name which he would stick to for the rest of his life, forgetting his birth name, his surname, his service numbers, and his rank. From this day onward, the captain had died in the crash, and the Wanderer had taken his place. This name was not of a positive origin. The captain deliberately scolded himself with this name, a tribute to the blindly loyal death squad he once commanded, to the corporal who died next to him, to who he would become. This name was no alias of a hero, but a burden for a once misguided puppet. The following morning, the corporal was buried outside of the cave which the Wanderer had dragged her to the previous night. From this day forward, he would live in this very cave, surviving on the limited rations the vertibird had to offer, nearby xanderroot and brockflower, cave condensation, and anything else he could find. Only a mere week later, a character calling himself the Mantis King would confront the Wanderer and challenge him to melee combat. Not only was he invading on the Nomad's turf, but he was marked as Enclave. Using a vertibird propeller sword he had scavenged from the crash of the vertibird, the Wanderer tussled with the Nomad and would eventually lose, costing him critical damage to his armor due to the lack of training with the blade, before collapsing in defeat. Bizarre to the Wanderer, he was spared. Perhaps he was seen as a worthy opponent who required more thought, training, or more? Only Lord knows. But one thing the Wanderer knew was that this was most certainly the man who killed the Corporal, due to his adamant hatred of the Enclave armor he wore, which made the Wanderer prepare in every single way to get revenge for the death of his friend. This territorial battle between the two would go on for months, each making imaginary rules in their heads of how close they needed to be to blow each other's heads off, causing a rough life full of constant paranoia if one were to slit the other's neck as they slept. After around 2 months of waiting for the Mantis King to rear his ugly head, early 2270, the Wanderer sat in cover in his makeshift camp away from his home, before hearing someone beginning to climb the path to his position. Could it be him? When the intruder reached the top, it was revealed that this person was not his enemy, but a stranger wearing full Desert Ranger combat armor. Not the person he was thirsting to kill. Technically, the Ranger should have shot on sight, but had the initiative to ask why the Wanderer was up here before anything else. The Wanderer, utilizing the kind, careful, and curious nature of this mysterious Ranger, explained that he was no longer an Enclave operative, but an escapee, who was wanting revenge for a fellow escapee that was shot on sight by another dweller in the area, before asking the Ranger the same question. The Ranger explained that it was coincidental she found a character of the Wanderer's expertise in the land, as the local Desert Ranger force had come from the Mojave in search of the Viper Gang. These raiders had migrated from California and were seeking to grow their power and numbers in the Mojave before being almost entirely pushed back through a passage near Red Rock Canyon by the Desert Rangers, and through to the Turtlehead Mountain Trail, where the Wanderer currently resided. After this, she asked the Wanderer for his help, in which he declined and explained his current situation with the Nomad. The Ranger then offered to help settle things between the two, verbally, civilly, in turn for both of their help at the coming siege. It was with this that the Wanderer agreed, and the Ranger embarked on her search for the Mantis King. Upon finding him, unlike the Wanderer, the Mantis King nearly blew the Ranger's head off before she could even greet the man. The Ranger explained her situation, and then the Wanderer's, and how they both needed his help. The nomad agreed but stated he would be keeping a weapon close. Upon returning to the Wanderer's camp, he immediately began hostilities with the Mantis King, aiming a laser rifle at his head. The ranger intervened and pushed the two away from each other, ordering the Wanderer to explain that he was no longer with the Enclave and is merely furious about the murder of his friend. When the Mantis King heard this, he immediately apologized for killing his friend, in which the Wanderer lowered his rifle. Not to cease hostilities, however, but to hear what this sad sack of shit had to say and where he crawled from. It turned out that the sniper who killed the corporal was living a nearly identical lifestyle to the Wanderer, but with a storied history. This character was a former Great Khan member who abandoned the group and started a family in Utah, after traveling the Waste for years. He knew of the Enclave, he knew they were evil, worse than the group of raiders. During his time in Utah, he learned to command mantids at his will, as well as many other survival techniques, recipes and more. His family from Zion were murdered by the local wildlife, which, unlike the Wanderer, drove him to run from the site. Guilt he could not protect them. Anger. Sadness. These two enemies were a lot closer knit than once originally thought. The sniper saw the Enclave armor silhouettes and prepared to take the shot, and he would have killed the Wanderer too, if his gun had not jammed. The Wanderer then asked why he had not killed him all that time ago during melee combat, and the Mantis King replied that he was defeated through lack of morale. The Wanderer's suit of armor was a lot tougher than he originally anticipated, though his protection was far better than his skill in melee combat. With this, the Ranger then inputted that the two needed to settle their differences and put their thoughts to a greater problem at hand. The local village of Cato was being held captive by the Viper gang members as mentioned before, and the Desert Rangers were here to wipe the Vipers from the village and hopefully the wasteland. They needed all the backup they could get, calling upon local settlers to help even out the numbers. The two agreed and followed the Ranger down the trail to an encampment made nearby. Soon enough, despite his burning hatred lingering after the Corporal's death, the Wanderer and the Mantis King became somewhat allies, talking of their lives as they awaited their call to arms. The Wanderer seemed keen on travelling the wasteland, discovering stories of his enemies and people he had never met, and teaching those of his former allegiance to the Enclave. The Mantis King, on the other hand, wanted to start a new settlement up in the canyon where the two first met, finally living the life he dreamed of ever since Zion. Eventually, the time had come. The Wanderer was to assist in storming the town while the Mantis King lurked far in the distance with his sniper rifle in hand. This was not a swift and decisive victory, however, as many hostages and settlers were murdered or killed in action by the Vipers. Even some of the Rangers were slaughtered. Eventually, the leader of the Vipers was slain by no other than the Wanderer himself, causing the rest of the Vipers who remained to tuck their tails and run. The day had been won. The town of Cato was free, and the settlers who lived there could begin trying to get the town back on its feet after the Raider occupation's carnage with the help of the remaining Desert Rangers. It was decided that the town of Cato and the Turtlehead Trail were now to become property of a new faction formed from the people of Cato and some of the Desert Rangers who now exiled from the faction. This faction was named the Wanderer Legion. In honor of the ex-Enclave do-gooder who killed the leader of the Viper gang, the Wanderer's name was slowly becoming less of a burden to him. He felt redeemed, like he was on the road to redemption from his past. The Wanderer Legion were to act as vigilantes for the local wasteland, protecting towns like Cato from raiders, possible super mutants, local wildlife and more. Serving almost like the Desert Rangers, the symbol of this legion would be the Wanderer's pink helmet, which was now not a symbol of his old death squad, of destruction and chaos, but a symbol of rising hope for the wasteland. A few months after the trail was conquered, the Wanderer made plans to travel the wasteland. He appointed the Mantis King as acting leader of the Wanderer Legion, and then offered to take the Ranger on his travels with him, to which she agreed. From that day forward, the Wanderer and the Ranger were to walk the waste together and momentarily leave the faction in the town they had built. On their travels, the two produced holotapes with valuable information on them, documenting their discoveries in the wasteland, carrying the tapes on their travels as they went place to place exploring. Eventually, the pair made it to a place the Wanderer saw as familiar. The bleached sands of California were spotted by chunks of metal and rubble. The remains of what seemed to be a gas station and some sort of old town, as well as a rotting old rusty vertibird, were below the steep sand mound that the Wanderer and the Ranger stood atop. Navarro, or what was left of it, stood in ruin in front of the Wanderer. In a way, he was happy, knowing that his wish for the Enclave to burn had come true, but the feeling of sadness still clouded his mind puzzlingly. The Ranger assured him that his past was no longer an issue, considering that the Enclave were obviously gone, and he has proven himself to be a worthy ally and hero to those he saved from the clutches of the raiders. He no longer had to carry the burden of regret on his back anymore. He was free of his past, and was destined to create a future for his newly founded settlement. One whole year later, the two would finally return to Kato. Upon reaching their settlement, however, something seemed off. The settlement looked damaged and quiet, almost as if there was some sort of recent attack, and a few meters from the entrance stood no other than the current leader of the faction, the Mantis King. After the three greeted each other warmly, the Mantis King's tone became serious, and he asked for the two to follow him inside as it was not safe to talk out in the open. Upon entry, everyone was hidden within their tents and camps. Not a soul dared step outside bar the scouts, which is how the Mantis King knew that the two were coming home. After a while, they all reached a tent which was marked as the Wanderer's Tent, the main base of operations for the Wanderer Legion's acting leaders. Inside, there were some of the Mantis King's assistants and tacticians. The Mantis King then began to explain the dire situation of the Wanderer Legion, its members, and the surrounding towns and settlements under its protection. The people were suffering underneath a powerful gang, calling themselves the Steelheads, a heavily armoured force who inducted some of the ex-Vipers into the fray. They had been torturing and killing those who stood 1,000 miles within their sight, exacting revenge in honour of their fallen Viper brothers. These hooligans were equipped in armour as best as T-51B power suits, most likely ripped from the corpses of Brotherhood of Steel paladins. There was no way, in the current eyes of the tacticians and leaders of the Wanderer Legion, that this force could be defeated the same way or like the way the Vipers were back when with the Rangers, not without a lot of backup. The group needed to be stealthy and utilise the Steelhead's power against them. This band of raiders resided in an old yet functioning munitions factory which used to belong to the Wanderer Legion before they were chased from the premises, or slaughtered. After days of thinking of a decent strategy, the Ranger finally had a somewhat decent idea. Using recent intel from the same morning, an old missile silo was spotted in the far distance by scouts who recently returned from their expedition. This site appeared to only recently have had any Steelhead presence and, due to the long distance, was determined to have a limited security force, especially when only recently discovered. This base could possibly house the firepower capable of blowing the entirety of the munitions factory sky high. A small squad was to be dispatched immediately, led by the Wanderer, the Mantis King, and the Ranger, in which they would sneak within the walls of this silo and steal at least something to help them against these dominating bandits. After nearly a day's worth of preparation, travelling and reconnaissance, the team of 5 finally arrived at the location. After sneakily taking down a handful of heavily armoured guards and walking through the silo, the team reached a large storage room with plenty of crates. As the team reached the first crate filled with C4, 3 raiders appeared and began to fire upon the group, injuring the Mantis King and knocking him to the floor, temporarily incapacitated. Amid the firefight, the Wanderer grabbed the Mantis King and swiftly threw him into cover, attempting not to injure his friend further before redrawing his laser rifle. Once the firefight had concluded and the raiders were defeated, the team helped the Mantis King to his feet and began escaping, the Wanderer turning to grab the crate they had come for in the first place. Under fire, the team fled the scene as fast as they could. Days later, after making sure the raiders had lost their scent and the Mantis King was at least somewhat capable of travelling, the 5 returned to the base with an intact C4 crate. The Mantis King was rushed to the emergency tent for further checkups while the rest of the team returned to the lead tent and discussed their next moves. Now that the Wanderer had resumed control of his faction while the Mantis King was knocked out of the field, the Ranger was now appointed the secondary advisor for the time being, and the entirety of the camp began to draft up how the Wanderer Legion would show the Steelheads not to mess with an ex-Enclave operative and his followers. The Wanderer's plan was as follows. The front of the Legion's force will storm the front gate, using the terrain and objects in the area as cover. Meanwhile, a small stealth squadron will use distance and the element of surprise to breach the rear entrance. Once inside, the team would place the C4 onto the reactor, which lay below the facility, before fleeing, sending the retreat signal to the attackers, and blowing the place. The plan was set, and the Ranger and her forces were ready to go, as was Wanderer's team. The following day, they would claim sweet victory and dominion once again. The Wanderer's team set off first in the early hours of the following morning to evade detection. The 5 set off through Kato before banking to the east to avoid possibly being spotted. Hours later, the formation would be complete, and the battle would commence. Rangers, former bandits and settlers that all served under the pink flag of the Wanderer Legion faced the front of the factory to the disbelief and the amusement of the raiders. Suddenly, the first shot was fired. Heavy losses were sustained on both sides. The accurate marksmen of the Wanderer Legion were an even fight for the bloodthirsty, dominion-crazed steelheads, who were more fiercely equipped than any one man in the Legion. Except for one. The ex-Enclave soldier, clutching his iconic laser rifle he had carried since his days as an Enclave serviceman, sprinted across the sands of the waste, followed by his 4 squad mates. As the team reached their destination, they took on a more sneaky approach, creeping about the walls encasing the factory before entering a back door. When entering the large structure hiding the reactor deep below, the Wanderer encountered some defense. The first to fall was a member of Wanderer's squad. However, their heavy firepower was no match for the Enclave advanced power armor. Soon enough, the Wanderer's team was on the move once again. As they usurped their way through the ancient metal walls of the underbelly to the reactor, they faced even more defense from the steelheads. Each member of the team was picked off one by one. No one was spared bar the man himself, although if it were not thanks to his experience, training and power armor, he surely would have shared the same fate. With the other members dead, this meant it was down to the Wanderer, and the Wanderer alone, to finish the fight. Upon finally reaching the reactor, the Wanderer began placing the C4 charges which he snatched from the bleeding corpse of one of his fallen allies. Once all of the charges were set, he pulled the detonator from his side only to reveal a shocking horror. The detonator had sustained damage. A large plasma blast melted away at the circuitry. He was lucky that the detonator was not linked to the C4 as of right now, otherwise he would have been cooked where he stood. But this stroke of luck opened a grisly avenue for the Wanderer, one which would require his sacrifice. The Wanderer announced to the Ranger via comms to withdraw the troops, and he would not be getting out. The Ranger replied in protest, but soon subdued to the circumstances. Soon enough, steelhead bandits would begin to storm the reactor, in which the Wanderer then fired a single laser blast into the C4, detonating the explosives, the reactor, and the facility. A large mushroom cloud erupted from the newly formed crater in the ground, rubble and debris spurting from it. A sore sight which cursed the eyes of onlookers miles away. This, in a way, was the Wanderer's ultimate validation of his drive to become far more than what he was when he was a mere Enclave puppet. He'd come from a blindly loyal soldier to a hero, making the ultimate sacrifice for his friends, his faction, and the wasteland as a whole. And with this, he was complete. After the carnage unfolded, the Wanderer Legion did not celebrate with happiness, but accepted their victory with heavy hearts. The man who had saved them at Cato from the clutches of the Vipers had saved them once again, but in his place remained dust and echoes. The Wanderer was gone. Days later, after the smoke had settled, the entirety of the Wanderer Legion went searching the nearby debris at the obvious risk of their health, only to discover the fractured helmet of an Enclave soldier. This solidified to the group that their leader was in fact dead. Graves of debris were erected to honor the fallen who died in the efforts to free everyone from the ruthless clutches of the steelheads. Most of said graves lying empty, with no discoverable corpse. One with a blasted Enclave helmet lying above a shallow grave shared the same trait. The pink helmet among the flag of the Wanderer Legion waved high on the flag surrounding the gravesite. The Mantis King, the Ranger, and all the previous companions and allies gathered to honor their fallen friends. Some of the members held out hope in the following weeks, as ghoulified and burnt men in power armor, once steelheads, began to crawl from the pit. This made some members think that there was a spark of hope for their hero's survival. Unfortunately, his return was anticipated to no result, flattening the rumor once and for all. The Eridanus Enclave sector, during the time that the Wanderer had fled the faction, departed from their home after their location was compromised by a band of NCR scouts. Operation Eagle, as it was called, was initiated, in which all personnel and civilians were evacuated and taken to an outpost located in Chicago, codenamed Charlie Stronghold. They would assist in the repair of Enclave Eyebot Duraframe Subject E some years later, and all information after the fact has been classified and redacted. At long last, the NCR won the Battle of Hoover Dam in the 2280s for the second time against Caesar's Legion, gaining dominion over New Vegas. Some time after their victory, the Republic sent troops into Turtlehead and seized control of the site, diminishing the watchful eye of the Wanderer Legion. Membership started decreasing. Some left, some died. Eventually the Wanderer Legion reached a point where there was only a handful of members left. These members parted ways, but vowed to keep the flag of their former faction on their backs and in their memories. The Wanderer Legion disbanded, and the remains of their once nimble yet powerful force remains at the crater and the ghost town of Cato. In the years following, the Ranger travelled to the Mojave to enlist in the NCR's Ranger Division. Considering her past experiences with the Desert Rangers, she planned to once again discover purpose in her duty and service to those who would need it. Although skeptical at first, soon enough the NCR was proven a fool not to let this talented Ranger join their ranks. She thought about her old friend a lot, the travelling they had done, the missions they had completed together, their victories and defeats. She would never let go of the burning memory of the Wanderer, but she too would have to push on and let go of the grief she felt. The Mantis King decided he would once again bathe in the sorrows of his past and travel back to Utah, to finally be at peace with his fallen family, to come to terms with those he had lost. It was here that he reconnected to his skills of old, training wildlife and surviving on what Mother Nature blessed his surroundings with, even keeping a pet mantis. Unlike another character spoken of in legends from Zion, the Mantis King would be yet another watchful eye for the area, protecting himself and others from any who try to stand on them. The town lay barren, abandoned, scarred from past battles and turmoil. No one to call it home except the ghosts who inherited the nearby graves. The rusting vertibird still sleeping near the corporal's grave, tent flaps slowing in the wind accompanied by an unsettling, heart-wrenching silence. Eventually, prospectors and settlers would scavenge and refurbish the site to its former glory in the far future, learning of the past stories there via notes and terminals. These messages sunk morals and lessons into onlookers' heads, and one of the lessons that stuck out to the readers was that war never changes. It is a well-known fact that the Wanderer was dead. However, the wasteland is a wild and bizarre place, and many miracles happen within it every day. And one of these miracles happened to be the very armor that the Wanderer wore, which appeared to be the savior of a previously thought dead man. With a partially ghoulified face, tackled by the many serums that the Enclave gave to us back in the day, I survived. And that, my friends, is my story. There is much more to tell. Too much for now, in fact. 11 years worth, if you'd believe that. But it is my promise that those stories will be told one day. Thank you very much for watching.